In this video, we're going to show you how to install an exhaust manifold and catalytic converter on the left hand or front side of the engine on your Ford Explorer, located right behind the radiator. With the hood open, go ahead and open up the cap for the expansion tank. Set that aside. With the vehicle raised, we're going to use our 19mm wrench and come up underneath the driver's side of that radiator. You're going to locate this white plug or drain plug. We're going to go ahead and turn that counterclockwise. You want to have a catch can or a bucket underneath to go ahead and catch this coolant. At this point here, we have just a small dribble of coolant coming out. It's pretty much safe to go ahead and close this. Now we can close it by hand. We don't need the wrench. Just tighten that down. Just snug it up by hand. We want to go ahead and remove our mass airflow sensor here. Now I'm using a mirror here to show you there's a red lock clip on this here. I'm going to use a pick. You can use your finger if you want, but you want to go ahead and grab that and just kind of pull that out. Let's see if we can get our finger underneath there and pop that out. You can see that that clip has extended out. Now we're going to press in on this little retaining button here, and that'll allow us to go ahead and pull that off. There's that little red lock clip. Our air intake tube is attached to the throttle body using a clamp. We're going to use our flathead screwdriver to loosen this. To the right of this clamp, you're going to locate this vacuum hose right here. Just pull that up and off. And over here to the left side of the air intake tube, we also have another vacuum port right here. There's a little gray clip or spring clip here. You can push on this. You can see it's flexible. Push in on that. We're going to grab this hose and pull this off. Separate it like that. On the corner of the air box right here, we have a little retaining tab for this harness. We're going to use our trim tool. Simply get underneath that and carefully pry up on that and pop that off. And then on the airbox lid, we have the metal spring clips supporting or holding the cover to the base. Simply just pry that off. There's a couple of them. Now we can go ahead and grab this whole unit here. We're going to pull it off of the throttle body. Lift up on this unit, pull it up and off, and set it aside. The lower airbox area here is held in place by two 8mm bolts. Go ahead, loosen and remove these. With those removed, and I'll go ahead and lift up on this. Give it a little wobble, and what we're doing is we're separating the little rubber grommet and the post. I'm going to work this up and out. Above the cooling fan assembly, you're going to locate this big wiring harness that runs across the top. It runs down the driver's side of that cooling fan. You're going to use your trim tool. You want to go ahead and lift up on the little retaining buttons there and pop these off. Now these are a series of these running across the entire top and then down the other side. Across the top of the fan assembly. Just continue this process until the wire harness is completely free and clear of the cooling fan assembly. We have our upper radiator hose running across the front, supported by this little bracket. Just gotta lift up in that hose. I want to grab that little bracket. I'm going to use a pocket screwdriver on the passenger side of this upper radiator hose bracket, and about halfway down there's a hole in the side of it. So what you're going to do is put your screwdriver in there, and you can actually release this here. You're going to pull up on that clamp and put your screwdriver in there. You could probably use a pick as well and push it back. You're going to push this clip towards the fan, and you're going to pop this out and you're releasing this little tab right here. So when you put put your screwdriver in, you're gonna push this and adjust that and pop it out. On the passenger side of this cooling fan, you're gonna locate the upper radiator hose clamp. We're gonna use some pliers. I wanna go ahead and compress the clamp and slide that back. You're gonna work that clamp back with that hose if you can. Then go ahead and grab that hose. And just kind of flip that back up and out of the way. With the hose out of the way, you can see a couple of the other retaining tabs here that were just kind of covered from the hose there. So just go in and finish popping those off there. On the driver's side of the fan, we're going to locate an 8mm bolt right here. I'm going to go ahead and loosen and remove that. This is one of the bolts here holding the fan in place. There's one on the passenger side. This is going to be located just a few inches lower than the driver's side. And this bolt is located just below the upper radiator hose port. And we switch over to a hand ratchet, 1/4 inch, just for clearance purposes. Okay, go ahead and remove that bolt. Disconnect the fan on the driver's side of the cooling fan assembly. I'm going to reach up just underneath here, push in, and pull that harness off. I'm going to do the same for the passenger side fan. The cooling fan assembly has a couple retainer tabs just resting on top of the radiator. It's one on the passenger side, one over on the driver's side. When we lift this up, we're going to pull it up and then tilt it inward towards the motor and then lift it up. Now as you're lifting this up, you just want to maneuver this around the wiring harnesses. Use our 15mm socket to go ahead and loosen the 2 nuts on our downpipe flange. We did apply some heat to these nuts here to go ahead and loosen them. And this bolt is held on to the engine by 2 13mm bolts. Let's go ahead and loosen and remove those. On the bottom of our catalytic converter, we have an O2 sensor down here. We're going to use our 22mm wrench. You want to go ahead, what we're going to do is we're just going to loosen this because the wire is still connected and the wire goes up top. We just want to break that free, and ours is loose now. Let's go back up on top. I'm going to go ahead and flip our upper radiator hose back, and we're going to go ahead and remove this upper cover right here. On the upper portion back here, there's going to be a plastic push pin on the back here and a plastic one here. This one here is broken on our particular vehicle. We're just going to use our trim tool and pop out the center of this button here. and then pry out the base. This is the pin right here. You just pry out the center and remove that. Do the same for the other side if you have it. Set that aside. And with both of those removed, we can finish pulling this up and off. Right on top of the valve cover facing you, there is the connector for the upper O2 sensor. I'm going to press down on this little clip here. And we'll go ahead and separate that connector. I'm going to go ahead and flip our upper radiator hose back up and out of the way again. Pull our cooling fan harness up and out of the way. Now on the top of our exhaust manifold, we have a heat shield. There is technically 4 10mm bolts securing this. There's 2 on the top here, and then there's 2 on the front. Now our heat shield is rotted across the front and has separated from the 2 bolts. We can't do much about that, but what we can do is remove the 2 bolts still securing that. Now if all of your bolts are still there, you want to go ahead and remove all 4 of them. Sometimes it might help to use some heat on these bolts. And once you have your bolts removed, go ahead and grab that heat shield, pull that up, work it through that O2 sensor, and set that aside. On the top of a catalytic converter, you have an O2 sensor here as well. This is the upstream O2 sensor. You can use your O2 sensor socket or a 22mm wrench. We did heat this up. And be careful if you're using a wrench for this here, you don't want to slip and hit the radiator. Spin the harness with the sensor and go ahead and remove this. Go ahead and remove that sensor, set it aside. Now we just removed this O2 sensor and we're going to have to remove the lower one as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just temporarily thread this into the exhaust manifold. This is going to protect the O2 sensor and keep it from mixing up the placement of these units. And go ahead and set that aside. Now if you follow your lower O2 sensor up, it comes to this connector right here. We want to go ahead and separate this connector. All right. With that separated, now we can reach down. We had already loosened that O2 sensor from down below. You can reach down and you can unthread that O2 sensor from the bottom. Now on the exhaust manifold that we're removing from the vehicle, the factory part has a bolt hole here on the upper left, as well as one right down below it. Now the updated catalytic converter and manifold component has a bolt hole here and one diagonal. So when we remove ours, there's going to be 2 here, and then the remainder of the bolts or nuts are actually in the same corresponding area. So you just want to pay attention to that when you're down underneath removing this hardware. Now around the perimeter of our exhaust manifold is going to be a series of 13mm nuts on here. Use a small pry bar just to work this a little bit. Now on the bottom side here, we have our bracket as well as our flange right here. Now our flange is tight up against the rest of the exhaust, but there is a little bit of flexibility. If you grab the pipe here and pull down gently, make sure that our flange here is loose. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna try and pull down on this pipe a little bit. On the top of this bracket, there's a nut that's preventing us from pivoting this bracket out of the way. This bracket is hitting the other side of the transmission area here. So we wanna go ahead and loosen the nut on the top. We're using a 13mm deep socket. Just to the left of the flange, there is a second 13mm nut between the oil pan, between the oil filter and the catalytic converter. We're using our gear wrench to get up in there. It's a swivel head gear wrench. And work that bracket out and reach down and grab our manifold. Slide this up and out. And with that removed, we're going to reach back in there and grab our gasket. On the lower left-hand corner here, there would have been a stud. And it would have looked like this here. Now, the stud came out with a nut from our lower portion here and then one from up top. We're gonna end up reinstalling our upper one here, but we have to do on the lower one here is we have to relocate it diagonal over into this port here. From the factory, this is a threaded hole. We're gonna go ahead and run a tap through it just to clean the threads. So when we install the new manifold, there's gonna be a stud and a nut here and a stud and a nut here, and this hole will be left open. Now I did spray some rust penetrant into this port here. We did run a tap into it a little bit to clean it. And I'm going to run this stud into it to go ahead and clean up some more of the threads. And that's exactly what we want. We'll thread the stud in, snug that down in a position. And we'll do the same for the upper left. We're gonna use some spray solvent on the side of the cylinder head here. We're gonna wipe this down. We wanna go ahead and inspect the cylinder head ports, make sure there's no damage, anything that we need to be cautious about when we go to install our new gasket. We wanna make sure that our surface is clean of any damage or debris, old gasket material, anything like that. Now we have our O2 sensors in our new catalytic converter. I'm gonna go ahead and thread this in and tighten them up while we're out of the vehicle. They will not hinder our installation of the manifold at all. You wanna make sure that's in there nice and tight, crushing that gasket inside. Do the same for this one here. Now with those two tight, I'm gonna flip this and take our gasket here. And there was a little retainer star on here. I'm just gonna take a socket and just gonna tap this on. That's gonna allow us to go ahead and drop this down onto the down pipe without that gasket falling off. And lower our new gasket down into place. Now what I do is I lowered the manifold down onto the down pipe. And what we'll do is gently push down on the manifold, lining up the studs. Slide the manifold on. And what I'm going to do is get a couple of the nuts put on here. Now that we have all of the nuts and studs in place, I'm going to go ahead and start to snug those down. No, we're not going to make these super tight yet. What we want to do is we want to snug these down, but we're going to come back and torque them in the end. I'm going to install 2 new nuts on this here. These are 14 millimeter. Snug that. Let's go ahead and torque those down to 30 foot-pounds. Now let's go ahead and follow the torque sequence on our exhaust manifold studs here. Now, number one, if you had to replace any of these studs themselves, they have to be tightened to 108 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds, but 108 inch-pounds for the studs themselves. Once the studs have been installed, then you want to go ahead and torque down these nuts to 18 foot-pounds. Now, how we're going to do that is we're going to start at the lower right. This is going to be number 1 down below over here. Number 2, right here. 3, 4, be down underneath. 5 is the upper far left, and 6 is this one down over here. Now let's go ahead and torque these. These need to get torqued 2 times to 18 foot-pounds. So we're going to do this torque sequence 2 times. Now I'm going to repeat this entire process one more time. Still torquing to 18 foot-pounds. Not repeating this cycle 2 times. You'll probably end up with an exhaust leak, so make sure you do it twice. The new exhaust manifold does not utilize this heat shield, so you can go ahead and dispose of this here. The bolt holes do not line up on the corrected, updated manifold. Take your upper O2 sensor, and we're going to reconnect it to the connector on top here. Press that in, and you'll feel it and hear it click into place. go ahead and install the lower sensor here. Pull this over, install your upper engine cover. On the back side, you should have your 2 plastic push pins. Ours was broken on the throttle body, but we have one for the other side. You're going to insert that and then press down the center of the button to lock it into place. Now on our radiator, on the passenger side, there is a little hook tab down at the lower corner. On the driver's side, it's about halfway up the radiator. These tabs are what is going to retain the position of our cooling fans. So when we drop in our cooling fan assembly, there's a little tab on there that is going to fit inside these little retainers on both sides, and then we'll install the 2 bolts on the top. It's going to take a little bit of effort here to get this down in position. I'm just going to have to work this around the wiring harness and the hose. Just have some patience when doing this and be cautious. Okay, our fan is in position. On the passenger side, we're going to install our fan bolt. Now you're going to want to go ahead and lift up on that fan just a little bit so that the hole lines up. Going to get that bolt started. We're going to get the bolt started on the driver's side, and then we're going to snug them both down. Go ahead, snug that down gently. Let's go ahead and repeat the same for the passenger side. Once that bottoms out, just give it a little bit more. The next thing you want to do is install the entire wiring harness. So you're going to go ahead and pop retainers into corresponding clips here. Now this here goes to the lower portion of the fan assembly. So we're going to feed this down. Line that up. You can feel that connector pop into place. So now we have our retainers that run down along the edge here. Push these in. Install our passenger side fan connector. And install your retaining buttons in. Now we definitely want to pay attention to anything that might come in contact with the fan itself. Check all of your other wiring harnesses, make sure everything is clear. Good, line up your upper radiator hose. Now, in performing a job like this here, you want to make sure that your clamps are in good condition. If they're rusted and they look really thin and fragile, definitely replace them. You don't want to end up stuck on the side of the road with a coolant hose that had blown off and leave you stranded. Ours are a little bit rusty, but they're in good shape overall. Get that hose pushed in all the way. Make sure that clamp is seated. Install your upper radiator hose support. There's this little tang on here that's going to press down and fit inside. So simply lift up the hose, snap that down and in, and then drop that hose into place. Install our lower air box. Put the 2 nubs into the rubber grommets down below. Push it down. Line up the mounting tabs underneath the grill cover here and install your 2 bolts. Just going to get both of these bolts started here. Let's go ahead and zip those down. Just snug them down. Once those are snug, we're simply going to go ahead and drop our air filter into the airbox base. Let's go ahead and install our lid now. Now we're going to go ahead and install our airbox lid. On the upper edge right here, there's going to be 3 tabs, and these 3 tabs fit into the airbox base. Once those tabs are in, we can go ahead and lower the rest of this down in a position. Line up the air intake tube with the throttle body. Make sure it's seated all the way down as far as it'll go. We'll tighten down the clamp here using our flathead screwdriver. And once you have that tight, just to the right of this clamp, we have our vacuum hose here. I want to go ahead and insert that onto the back. Over to the left of our intake tube, we have this other hose right here. Simply going to line that up, push it on. You're going to feel it snap into place. Install your snap clips here on the airbox lid. There's 2 of them. Once you have these on, I want to go ahead and install our mass airflow sensor connector. Don't forget, once you press this on, you have to press this red lock tab in to position to lock it in. Press that tab in, and then we have the little retainer. This little plastic retainer here will press into the corner of the airbox lid. Now, in order to go ahead and fill up and top off your cooling system, you want to go ahead and open up the expansion tank here. Now, you're going to use the appropriate coolant for this unit here. You're going to fill it up roughly about 1 inch or 2 above the full cold mark. Close this up. Start up the vehicle. You want to go ahead and let that run for about a half hour. Wait for that thermostat to open up inside the engine, and that is going to go ahead and take the coolant from the expansion tank here and fill up where the air pocket used to be. At that point there, open this back up and top off the fluid as necessary. It might take you a couple times of doing that to go ahead and get this to the proper level. That is pretty much it for filling up your cooling system.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.